The truth is that people who have achieved the things that we want to and have found the fulfillment that they want in life, they're just like everybody else. They're just like us. They've experienced the fear. They've experienced it at a high level. They've just found the tools and the resources to get through it. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Flow Over Fear podcast, where it is our mission to help you to rise above fear and realize your ultimate potential in leadership and life. I'm your host, Adam Hill, and it is my goal to share with you the human side of high performance. My guests share their experience with fear, anxiety, struggle, challenge, and most importantly, despite all of it, how they rose above it to achieve incredible results. So, if you're ready to rise up, let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Flow Over Fear and Three Things. And over the course of the last many weeks, I've had an opportunity to interview some pretty incredible people that have overcome their own fears in their own lives and anxieties and mental health issues and challenges, all that run the gambit, but all to achieve greater results in their own lives. And I wanted to share today three ways that some of those people, three of the common themes that I found in these interviews of how people have pushed beyond fear to achieve incredible results. There have been already within, the 50 or so episodes that we've done at this point, a lot of commonalities within these high achievers. And it's important for us to recognize that, because for many of us, we want to achieve great results. And we know we have it inside of us when we're aligned on our values, and when we have clarity of purpose, and when we do all of the right things that personal development tells us to do, that we have that capability to achieve that. But in the moment, we can be overcome by fear. And fear, of course, is that biggest obstacle. And however it shows up, fear can show up as imposter syndrome. It can show up as anxiety or panic. It can show up as irrational fear. But in any of those respects, it's an obstacle to us achieving those results. And the whole point of this show is to shift that frame of reference on its head and say, well, what if fear is not really an obstacle? But what if we can really look at it as a signal, something that can show us where we need to lean into, where we can lean into it and actually find greater growth? And a lot of the people that I've interviewed have already done that. And we can all do it too. And I want to show everybody how we can do that. But the problem is that many of us, feel like when we see the people that I interview or high achievers or people that have already achieved something great, when we look at what they've achieved, we often say to ourselves, well, we can't be that because they're already so many steps ahead of us that it's impossible to get there. Or, our limiting beliefs come to our mind, or self-doubt comes into mind, and it gets in the way of us actually pursuing what we want to achieve. And it gets into that dangerous trap. Have you ever felt that way? I know if you're listening to this and you've experienced fear or imposter syndrome or anything like that, you've probably felt that sense of self-worth or not being enough or not being able to be where somebody is. And that, of course, leads to us staying stuck with where we're at, either stuck in unfulfilling circumstances, not able to move forward or take the next step, or thinking that the next step is too big and we just can't make it to the top of the mountain because we're not ready. And so we convince ourselves that we need to stay in the same place that we are, stuck and unfulfilled and frustrated. But what I want to share is that, and the reason why this show exists is to show that people who have achieved those things, for the most part, anybody who's in those situations, most of the people that I interview have gone through, significant challenges, and they've experienced the same level of frustration or stuck or uncertainty or fear that you have. And because of that, they've carved a path. And one of my recent guests, Mike Ayala, actually said this, that, if someone else has carved the path, or if someone else has already done what you want to do, Well, then it's just a matter of unraveling it, dismantling it, and recognizing what framework that is to actually employ it yourself. And it sounds simple, right? I mean, it is a simple concept, but it's not easy to get past the obstacles that are in our head, our limiting beliefs, and those kinds of things. The truth is that people who have achieved the things that we want to and have found the fulfillment that they want in life, they're just like everybody else. They're just like us. They've experienced the fear. They've experienced it at a high level. They've just found the tools and the resources to get through it. And I want to share a couple of those with you today. I just want to share 3 of those with you today, because these 3 are the common themes that have showed up repeatedly throughout the interviews. I didn't force them. I didn't lead them, but these are what have come up naturally and organically through this conversation. And I think they're vital, and they're not by no means exhaustive, but these are some really big ones. And the first element of that many high achievers use to help push them to their goals and push them beyond the fear is community. This is such an important concept. And I never understood this until I got sober in my 30s. I believed that I had to do everything on my own. All the way back from when I was experiencing anxiety and fear early on in my life, I thought that I was alone because I thought I was crazy. I thought the fear inside me, and I knew the fear that was inside me was so irrational, so unnecessary, that I knew that other people would think I'm crazy. And I felt very alone because of that. And I know that other people who experience mental health issues experience that sense of aloneness as well. If aloneness is even a word, I don't even know if it's a word. But I wouldn't have even been able to say aloneness in my previous life without being afraid of what people thought of me. And frankly, I still care about what you think of me. Don't get me wrong, but not so much that I care if you care if I say aloneness. But anyway, I digress. I was alone. I felt alone, but I wasn't alone. 40 million people in the United States alone have anxiety disorders or some form of anxiety. It's prevalent in our society, and only recently has it become okay to start opening up about it and talking about it. And it's becoming more so as we're overstimulated in this world. 10% of the population is in the last place that I've read experiences addiction or alcoholism or something that like that. And there's communities for these places. That was the first community that I got into, was a community of sobriety. And it was what really helped me get sober, because I found a group of people that had what I wanted. And that's the important concept in any community, not just the healing part of it, not just the part where we go through the healing process where community is important, but also the learning and the mentorship process where that's important. In my life, I learned about the communities in the healing side of it through sobriety. And when I started getting into triathlon, I learned about that through triathlon clubs and communities of triathletes who had what I wanted, who became what I wanted. I wanted to qualify for the Ironman World Championship, and I saw other people that did it, and I joined their community. Sounds simple, right? Well, it is that simple. It's not easy, but it is simple. And this is what entrepreneurs or people like that do. They join communities. And in my entrepreneurial efforts or in my business efforts, I've joined communities of organizations, including GoBundance and Brand Builders Group, that have helped me to work through a lot of the challenges I have in my business, work through the challenges I have in my brand, and ultimately learn how to better serve the community in a better way. We can utilize the communities not just to get the help we need, but also learn to serve. A rising tide lifts all ships, and we do that in a community. And that is why most of the achievers that I've had on my podcast and most achievers in general have some community of people that they surround themselves with that lift them up. Who is the community that you're surrounding yourself with? Is it a group of people that are pulling you down? Is it a group of people that are draining your energy? Are you feeling lifted up by them? Are you feeling like you're gaining value from them? Are you feeling like you're giving value to them? do you want to continue to engage in them? If that's not where you're at, find those communities. It's easier than ever to find communities like that with social media, and there are tons of ways to engage in that process. And so finding a community, that's really the first thing that helps us to push beyond our fears and to rise above our fears. We'll find that we have more courage when we're surrounded by people who are working toward our goals. And the second element is faith. The second way that high achievers really push through their fears is through faith. And I know this sounds very cliche, but it is another one that comes up quite frequently in these interviews. And I know that this can be a controversial subject, because this faith requires, that we have a sense of, faith, that we believe in something that might not be completely evidence-based now, that we believe that there's a higher power working toward a greater good. And I know that I've said in the past that this is not meant to be a religious show or a spiritual show, but ultimately what happens when we're talking about fear, and what happens when we're talking about pushing into the greatest version of ourselves, we have to transcend who we are now. And in order to transcend that, it takes more than just a belief in ourselves. That is certainly a step, is believing in ourselves, but it's also understanding and having the faith that there's a greater good that's looking out for our well-being, whether that is the universe or God, that it's there. For me, and I've interviewed a lot of people who talk about God being what they have that faith, where they found that faith, that they found faith in a God, and that helped them to transform into the greatest version of themselves, whether it be their service, whether it be their attitude, whether it be the way they show up in the world. And for me, that's true as well. When I went through my first transformation, I've always believed in a God. It's just my nature. It's not something that I push on anybody. I'm very, very open-minded on that way, but it's something that I believe, and I've always privately believed. But when I even believed in that God during my worst of times, when I was drinking heavily, when I was full of anxiety. And a lot of times during that time, I was asking why God, why me, why am I struggling through this? Why does this happen to me when, why am I going through all this pain? And why is there all this pain in the world? And that becomes a bigger conversation, of course, but it was ultimately when I reached my worst, where I finally let go of control. And I gave myself to a higher power, realizing that I could not do it alone. That higher power led me to community. And in that community, I believe that higher power existed, but it was really faith that helped me through that. And for a lot of people, regardless of their background, I've talked with people who've had backgrounds where they've spent time in jail, where they were scientists and all sorts of backgrounds. They've come to faith in some way or another in order to elevate to their very best self and their best version of service. So faith is a very, very important part. It's just a common theme that I've heard in a lot of these interviews, and it's something to consider. And if it makes you feel uncomfortable, I understand. And this is not meant to be some kind of, I'm going to convince you to find God or whatever it happens there. But what I am going to do is I'm going to challenge you with that discomfort and say, maybe we should look at discomfort as something we should desire. Maybe we should desire discomfort. After all, if we're going to rise above fear, we have to lean into it and really dig deep into why we're feeling uncomfortable about it. And then the third thing is really important too, and is also might make us feel a little bit uncomfortable, but it's also a recurring theme that I'm hearing throughout these interviews, which is these people that are achieving great things despite the fear and overcoming great challenges are taking absolute responsibility within their lives. And I've heard this on multiple occasions that, there's a couple of directions we can go as human beings when we experience traumatic events or difficulties or things like that. And I just kind of mentioned it within that faith piece is that we either lean into this victim mentality where we constantly stay a victim of our circumstance, where something bad happens to us and we think that that's life happening to us. And then we internalize that as being a victim and somehow being less than and not being able to be enough. And that, of course, translates into frustration and burnout and staying stuck because we choose to be in that victim place. And I know that might trigger a lot of people when I say choose to be in that victim place, because legitimately there's a lot of victimhood out there, but we don't have to live there. We don't have to live there. We don't have to live in victim mentality. And when we can take absolute responsibility over our lives, not over circumstances. I mean, I'm not asking people to take responsibility over trauma that has existed in their lives. But one common theme that I see with people who have healed, who have recovered, who have become, who've been able to transcend and transform their former selves, has been taking responsibility of their own lives, taking responsibility of who they are now, who they have been, and who they will be. And when we take that responsibility back, we gain freedom. And that freedom comes with a tremendous responsibility. And so we have to own it. We own that responsibility. And that's not always an easy path, but the path of growth is never easy. The path of growth is never easy. It is something that is challenging because we have to have resistance in order to grow. And so if bad things happen in the moment, they feel bad, they feel traumatic, they feel terrible. But if we're able to heal through them, if we're able to take ownership of it, that's what I mean by it. I don't mean saying that it's your fault. It's definitely not your fault for any of the circumstances that hit in your life. You are enough. You are enough. But taking responsibility means just taking ownership of it, ownership of who you are, who you have been, who you will be. Not in shame, not in judgment, but with empowerment, so that you can grow and become the best way to serve others. Imagine if you could take ownership of something that has caused you pain and be able to turn that into triumph and help others to do the same. That's what we do with fear. When I think about fear and when I think about my anxiety and I think about the time that, the times that I've hurt people within my addiction, and the times where I felt that I was slighted by other people, I take responsibility for it. I take ownership of it. I take ownership of the person I was at a young age with social anxiety. That was me. I own that. And I heal from it. And now I try to help people to rise above it and find that superpower in there. I think we can all do that. And when we can embrace these three elements of community, faith, and absolute responsibility, the reward is that we can achieve greater fulfillment. We can get out of that stuck mode. We can transcend this life that we're in now and find a more glorious and a more fulfilling path, a more joyful path, a more joyful life that includes continuous growth. And that is not an easy path. But if you want joy and fulfillment in this life, you should not be seeking the easy path. We should be seeking the path of continuous growth, which includes discomfort. That's not easy, but it's by all means, it's more fulfilling. And if you want proof of that, well, most of the interviews that I've had thus far with achievers, as we've talked through these fear elements, and how they achieve greater flow and how they achieve more in their lives. They talk about the communities that they've been a part of that have helped lift them up. They talk about their faith, not just in themselves, but in that higher power. They talk about responsibility and taking that responsibility and building on it. Those all help them to grow. And for me, that's been a huge element that's changed my life ever since being somebody who's lived in that victim mentality of in my addiction, in my anxiety disorder, to somebody who's been able to turn that into something where I can push that and I can find courage, that I can become a courageous person that's able to lean into fear and find that greater achievement. And if you'd like to learn more about all of these things, obviously subscribe to this podcast and listen to the interviews, because I want to dig in and I want to continue to share this message. But also reach out to me if you'd like to learn more about how we can rise above fear and achieve greater flow. If you want to achieve that in your business and in your life, working through a group coaching platform that adds these elements and that helps us to build that type of community. And if you're interested, please reach out to me. But in the meantime, thank you for joining me on this episode of Flow Over Fear, 3 Things. I look forward to catching you next time. Thanks for tuning in. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to the Flow Over Fear podcast. If you'd like to learn more about getting into flow and learn the foundations of flow, I have a free video series on my website at www.adamcliffordhill.com called The Foundations of Flow. Feel free to go there and download it and start your journey to rising above fear and achieving greater flow in your life. And if you like this episode, and I'm guessing you did if you stuck around for this long, then please do me a favor and hit the subscribe button, and you will receive notifications when I have new interviews, new recaps, and new trainings that pop up on YouTube. Thanks again for joining us.